In a quiet town where life moved at its own peaceful pace, an unexpected event shook the foundations of a seemingly ordinary family. It was the night that changed everything. The birth of 3 beautiful triplets brought joy to a couple who had longed for children. They had always dreamed of a big family, and now their dreams had come true in the most extraordinary way. But little did they know that this dream would soon turn into a heartbreaking nightmare. The triplets were born into a modest family with hopes of a bright future. They were identical in every way, their tiny hands and feet matching in perfect harmony. Their parents, filled with joy, could not believe how blessed they were. The birth of triplets is a rare event, and the news spread quickly around the town. Neighbors and relatives gathered to offer their congratulations, admiring the babies who seemed to be miracles from above. However, behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. The parents, who had always hoped for the best for their children, were unprepared for the challenges that came with raising 3 babies at once. The financial strain became overwhelming. The couple struggled to keep up with the mounting medical bills, baby supplies, and the demands of everyday life. What had started as a joyful celebration soon turned into a desperate struggle. As the days went by, the once strong relationship between the couple began to crumble. The father, who had always been a hard-working man, became increasingly stressed, trying to balance work and caring for his family. The mother, though loving and devoted, found herself overwhelmed by the constant demands of motherhood. The babies cried through the night, and no matter how hard they tried, the parents could not seem to get any rest. The love they once shared seemed to fade into the background as the pressures of life took over. One fateful evening, after a particularly difficult day, the couple found themselves at a breaking point. In a moment of desperation, they made a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They decided to abandon their children, leaving them alone in their cribs, still too young to understand what was happening. They left a note, apologizing for the choice, but explaining that they simply could not cope with the responsibility any longer. It was a choice that would forever change the lives of their children. The triplets, who had been so full of promise just a few weeks earlier, were now left in a cold, empty room. They were too young to know the meaning of abandonment, but the heartache that followed would shape their lives forever. They were found hours later by a neighbor who had heard their cries. The neighbor, a kind-hearted woman, immediately took the babies to the local authorities. The news spread quickly, and soon, the entire town was left in shock. How could a parent abandon their own children? The question haunted everyone, but no one could find an answer. The triplets were placed into foster care, each child sent to a different home. Their first few years were spent in confusion, as they bounced between different families, never truly feeling like they belonged anywhere. Their once joyful future had been replaced with uncertainty. They were just babies, unable to comprehend why their parents had left them. Their journey was about to begin, but it would not be easy. The experience of abandonment left scars that would take years to heal. The triplets were separated, each one struggling to find their place in the world. They were often told stories about their parents, stories filled with sorrow and regret. The idea of being abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love and protect them became a recurring theme in their lives. It was a constant question that they would carry with them as they grew older. Why had they been abandoned? As the triplets grew, they formed a bond stronger than any they had known before. Despite the distance between them, they always knew that they shared something no one else could understand. Their bond as siblings was unbreakable. Though their early years were marked by pain, they found comfort in each other, and that comfort would be the foundation of their resilience in the years to come. The road ahead would not be easy for the triplets. They had already faced unimaginable hardship, but they had also experienced something that most people never do: survival. They had survived the worst kind of betrayal, and though they didn't understand it fully at the time, they would one day realize that this would only make them stronger. The journey of the triplets had only just begun. Their story would be one of courage, hope, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. In the face of abandonment, they had learned to rise. In the face of loneliness, they had learned to endure. The journey ahead would bring its own challenges, but for now, the triplets were together. They were no longer helpless babies in a crib. They were survivors, ready to face whatever came next. The triplets, once bound by the innocence of infancy, now found themselves in a world that felt strange and unfamiliar. Separated at a young age, each child was placed in a different foster home, a far cry from the family unit they had once known. The sudden change left them feeling lost, their early memories clouded with confusion and sadness. The pain of abandonment lingered, but they quickly learned that the world was not going to offer them the comfort and security they had once hoped for. At first, the transition to their new homes was difficult. The babies, no longer together in the same crib, struggled with the loneliness that came with being separated. They had each other once, sharing a bond that only siblings could understand, but now they were isolated, trying to make sense of a new life without the warmth of their parents. The first few years were marked by an overwhelming sense of displacement as the triplets adjusted to different families with different rules and lifestyles. The foster homes were full of kind-hearted people who genuinely tried to offer love and care, but the emptiness was still there. The triplets never felt fully at home, as if they were visitors in someone else's life. They were grateful for the warmth they received, but deep down, there was a hole in their hearts that nothing could fill. They would lie in bed at night, staring up at the ceiling, wondering why their parents had left them. Why had they been abandoned? The question lingered in their minds like an unanswered prayer. As they grew older, the triplets began to understand that their circumstances were different from other children. While other kids had parents who cared for them, loved them, and protected them, the triplets were alone in a world that seemed too big to navigate on their own. They had no memories of their parents' faces, no recollections of their voices, and no understanding of why they had been left behind. The questions kept piling up, and no answers came. In the homes where they lived, they often found comfort in each other. The triplets would find ways to communicate, even though they were separated. They would write letters to one another, sharing their hopes and fears, and slowly they began to piece together the fragments of their past. These letters were a lifeline for the triplets. They were the only connection to the family they had lost. Through their words, they shared their frustrations, their dreams, and their longing to find out what had happened to the parents who had abandoned them. As they entered their teenage years, the triplets began to form their own identities. Each child developed different interests, different personalities, and different dreams. But despite their differences, there was always something that connected them, their shared experience of abandonment. No matter how much time passed or how far apart they grew, they would always carry the same pain, the same emptiness inside. The journey of growing up without a family was not an easy one. The triplets faced the challenges of feeling out of place in a world that had rejected them. They were constantly reminded that they did not have the privilege of a family who had raised them, celebrated their milestones, or supported them through difficult times. The milestones of childhood that most people take for granted, birthday parties, family vacations, a parent's comforting embrace, were things the triplets never knew. They watched other kids grow up surrounded by love, while they were left to figure out life on their own. But in their own quiet ways, the triplets found strength. They relied on each other to survive. Though they were physically apart, they were never truly alone. They carried each other in their hearts, even when they couldn't see each other. Their bond, formed in the early days of their lives, was unbreakable. It gave them hope, even on the darkest days. As they navigated the ups and downs of their foster homes, the triplets learned valuable lessons about resilience. They learned that family wasn't just about blood relations. It was about the people who loved and cared for you, no matter the circumstances. They learned to be grateful for the kindness shown to them, even when it wasn't enough to fill the emptiness they felt. They also learned the power of hope, the hope that one day they would find the answers to their questions and the family they had always longed for. Their foster homes may not have been perfect, but they were stepping stones on a journey that would eventually lead the triplets to the truth. They had learned to adapt, to survive, and to grow. Despite the hardships they faced, they had become strong, independent individuals, shaped by their experiences, but not defined by them. The pain of their past was always there, but they had learned to use it as a source of strength, driving them forward on their quest to find answers and create a better future. As the triplets entered adulthood, they carried with them the lessons of their past. They had come to understand that growing up without a family wasn't easy, but it had shaped them into the people they were today. They had each other, and that was enough. They were ready to take the next step in their journey, with the hope that they would one day find the family they had lost. The road ahead was uncertain, but the triplets knew one thing for sure: they had the strength to face whatever came their way. As the years passed, the pain of abandonment began to shape the triplets into determined young adults. The longing for answers, the questions about their parents, their past, and why they had been left behind, grew with each passing year. The triplets, now in their early 20s, had found strength in each other and in their shared experience, but they were still missing the most important piece of the puzzle: their parents. The curiosity that had started in their childhood had transformed into a burning desire to uncover the truth. One fateful day, the triplets made a decision that would change their lives forever. They were no longer children waiting for someone to explain why they had been abandoned. They were adults, capable of making their own choices, and they were ready to embark on the journey that had been on their minds for years: the search for their biological parents. Their first step was to dig into the paperwork that had been left behind when they were placed into foster care. It was an overwhelming task, filled with outdated records and fragmented details, but they knew they had to start somewhere. The search was tedious, filled with dead ends and false leads. For every step they took forward, it seemed like 2 steps were taken back. But they were determined, and with each small clue they uncovered, their resolve only grew stronger. The triplets began by contacting the local authorities, hoping that the records might contain information about their parents. They knew it wasn't going to be easy, but they never imagined just how complicated the process would be. The officials were able to provide some basic details: names, addresses, and dates, but there was little else. The trail was cold. It felt as though their parents had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. The more the triplets dug, the more it seemed as though their family had never existed at all. But they couldn't stop there. The triplets turned to private investigators, desperate for answers. The investigators had more resources and tools at their disposal, but even they hit roadblocks. Every lead they followed seemed to end in silence. The birth certificates were the only solid documents they had, but they were marked with strange, incomplete information. The mystery of their parents' disappearance deepened with every unanswered question. Despite the obstacles, the triplets refused to give up. They began to reach out to anyone who might have known their parents: friends, old neighbors, distant relatives, and even people who had once worked with them. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The triplets learned that their parents had lived in a different city before they were born and had been struggling financially. The information didn't make much sense at first, but it was the first real lead they had received. This new discovery pushed them to travel to the city where their parents had lived, hoping to find answers. As they arrived in the city, the triplets felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. They didn't know what they would find, but they were determined to see it through. They began knocking on doors, visiting old homes, and asking questions. Most people they spoke to had no recollection of their parents, but eventually, they found someone who did, a former neighbor who remembered the family from years ago. The neighbor recalled the struggles their parents had faced, their financial difficulties, and how they had suddenly disappeared. This was the breakthrough the triplets had been waiting for. The neighbor explained that their parents had fallen on hard times, and there had been rumors that they had left the city in search of a better life. The neighbor had no contact information, but the triplets were not ready to give up just yet. Armed with this new information, they contacted local shelters and charities in the area, hoping to find any trace of their parents. The search became more intense as the days went on. Every lead felt more promising than the last, and for the first time in years, the triplets felt a glimmer of hope. It was in a small local community center that they finally got their first solid clue. The workers there recognized the names of their parents and revealed that they had been seen in the area a few months after the triplets had been placed in foster care. It was the first time the triplets had heard that their parents were still alive. This discovery was both overwhelming and emotional. However, the answers they had been searching for were still just out of reach. Despite knowing that their parents were alive, the triplets could not find them. It seemed as though their parents had intentionally disappeared, hiding from the world. The question of why they had abandoned their children still lingered. The triplets were torn between feelings of anger, sadness, and confusion. How could their parents leave them behind, only to reappear years later with no explanation? Their search led them to a small town where they were told that their parents had once worked. The town was quiet, and the people there didn't have much to say, but the triplets felt as though they were closing in on the truth. Every day they spent in the town was filled with anticipation, hoping that they would finally get the answers they had longed for. They visited local businesses and spoke with old residents, piecing together fragments of their parents' past. But just when they thought they were on the verge of finding their parents, the triplets hit another dead end. Despite their best efforts, they could not locate their parents or uncover why they had abandoned them in the first place. The frustration grew, and so did their sense of loss. Though their search didn't lead them to the closure they had hoped for, the triplets gained something invaluable along the way. They learned the true meaning of perseverance and the importance of family. Despite the unanswered questions and the lingering hurt, they had grown stronger together, supporting each other through the most challenging journey of their lives. The search for answers was far from over, but the triplets had learned that sometimes the search itself can change you. It had brought them closer as siblings, made them more determined than ever to find the truth, and taught them that no matter what, they would never give up on each other. After years of searching, the triplets had come to a crucial realization. The search for their parents, though still unresolved, had shaped them into stronger individuals. Their journey had been one of emotional highs and lows, filled with uncertainty, frustration, and moments of deep despair. Yet in the end, they had discovered something far more valuable than the answers they had been seeking: the unbreakable bond between them. The triplets had spent their entire lives feeling like something was missing. They had grown up with a sense of abandonment, carried the weight of unanswered questions, and longed for the parents who had left them behind. But as they moved into their adulthood, they came to understand that family wasn't defined solely by biological ties. It was something far more profound. Family was about love, trust, and support, and the triplets had everything they needed in each other. Their shared experience of abandonment had created a unique connection, one that could never be broken by distance or time. Through every hardship, every foster home, and every unanswered question, they had supported each other. As they looked back on their search for their parents, they realized that it wasn't just about finding the people who had given them life. It was about finding themselves, learning to be resilient, and accepting that family, in its truest form, was already within their reach. Although they hadn't found their parents, the triplets were no longer consumed by the need for closure. They had found peace in their bond, and with that peace came the freedom to move forward. Each of them had built their own life, careers, relationships, and dreams. They had not let their past define them. Instead, they had turned their pain into strength and their grief into growth. In the years that followed, the triplets remained close. They celebrated each other's milestones, shared moments of joy, and supported each other through life's challenges. They had become a family in the truest sense of the word, a family bound not by blood, but by the shared experience of overcoming adversity. They learned to cherish every moment together, knowing that no matter what life threw their way, they would always have each other. One day, while gathering for a family reunion, something incredible happened. As they sat together reminiscing about the old days, laughing about their childhood adventures, one of the triplets, Lena, received a call that would change everything. It was from a woman who had heard about their search for their parents. The woman explained that she had information that could lead them to their mother. The call was short, but it was enough to reignite the flicker of hope that had been buried deep within their hearts. For the first time in years, the triplets felt the wave of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. They had learned to move on with their lives, but the thought of finally finding their mother after all these years was overwhelming. The three siblings decided to meet in the town where they had spent so much time searching before. They were filled with hope, but they also understood that this might not bring the closure they had once imagined. Regardless of the outcome, they were ready to face whatever came next together. When they arrived in the small town, they were greeted by the woman who had reached out to them. She led them to a modest home on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of house that seemed to carry a weight of history, a home that had been untouched by time. The triplets walked up to the door, their hearts racing. As they knocked, they knew that whatever happened next would be a turning point in their lives. The door opened, and standing in front of them was a woman whose face was both familiar and unfamiliar. She looked older, worn by time and experience, but there was something about her that made the triplets' hearts race. It was their mother. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The triplets stared at the woman who had once been the center of their world, the woman who had abandoned them without explanation. Their emotions were a whirlwind: anger, confusion, and even a touch of relief. But more than anything, they felt a deep sense of closure. They had finally found the missing piece of their puzzle, the piece they had been searching for all these years. Their mother, tears welling in her eyes, explained the reasons behind her actions. She shared the painful truth of her own struggles and the choices she had made in desperation. It was a heartbreaking story, but one that brought clarity to the triplets' questions. While the answers didn't undo the past, they helped the triplets understand the complexities of their mother's decision. In the end, the triplets did not find the perfect resolution they had once dreamed of, but they found something far more meaningful: understanding. They learned that forgiveness was not about excusing past mistakes, but about finding peace with the past so that they could move forward. It was a moment of reconciliation, not just with their mother, but with themselves. As they walked away from the meeting, hand in hand, the triplets realized that their journey had come full circle. They had searched for answers, found their mother, and in the process, had learned that the love they had for each other was more than enough to heal the wounds of the past. Their new beginning was not about returning to the family they had lost. It was about building the family they had always had in each other. Together, they had created a future filled with love, understanding, and endless possibilities. And so, the triplets' incredible journey came to an end, not with a perfect conclusion, but with a heartwarming new beginning, one that was stronger than anything they had ever imagined.